I can still remember the morning as if it happened yesterday. The frost clinging to the window pane, the quiet stillness of the neighborhood, and the soft, almost reluctant light of a winter sun seeping through the blinds. Christmas was always my favorite time of year. Not because of the gifts, not because of the lights, not because of the songs that played endlessly through the stores, but because for me it was the one time I allowed myself to really feel. I had woken up early that day, as I always did, though there was an unusual heaviness in my chest. It wasn't just the cold that morning, but the weight of everything that had been accumulating over the years. The bills, the mistakes, the silent betrayals of people I thought I knew, and the harsh truth that life didn't care for your plans, or your hopes, or your good intentions. I sat by the window, holding a cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm long before I even took a sip. I watched the snow fall, each flake moving delicately, independently, yet somehow part of a larger, chaotic pattern. It reminded me of us, human beings, fragile, drifting, yet undeniably shaped by forces outside our control. I wondered for a brief moment if I had ever truly understood what I was doing with my life, or if I was merely a spectator to my own unraveling. Christmas was meant to be comforting, but that day the decorations in my apartment, the garlands, the lights, the small artificial tree in the corner, seemed almost cruel. They smiled and twinkled, pretending that everything was fine, pretending that the world was magical and bright. And yet, in my mind, everything was cracking. The day had begun like any other, but I felt the subtle tremors of an approaching collapse, and I would not ignore them. I thought of my family first. My parents, whose love was unconditional in theory but complicated in practice. The way my father always had this quiet disappointment, as though he measured every choice I made against some ideal I could never reach. My mother, whose affection was often wrapped in anxiety, in subtle warnings, in the careful management of expectations. I loved them, of course, but that love was threaded with fear. The fear that I would fail them, the fear that I would hurt them, the fear that no matter what I did, I would never be enough. That fear had followed me into adulthood, quietly shaping my relationships, my ambitions, my capacity for trust. And that morning, staring at the frost on the glass, I realized just how much it had cost me. Not just in lost opportunities, but in lost connection, in lost belief in my own worth. I tried to shake it off, to immerse myself in the familiar Christmas rituals. I put on a record, something classic, something nostalgic. The music filled the apartment, warm and melodic, and for a few fleeting minutes, I let myself believe that the world could be simple again. I strung up lights on the window, just enough to make the room glow softly, to offer some illusion of cheer. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. And then the phone call came. I remember the exact tone of the voice on the other end, calm, almost detached, but carrying a weight that immediately pressed down on me. The words were simple, clinical even. "It's over. There's nothing more to be done." I froze. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe properly for a few seconds. I had known something was wrong, had sensed the unraveling, but hearing it articulated, hearing it declared with such finality, it was unbearable. My mind raced, cycling through every memory, every choice, every word I had said or left unsaid. Could I have prevented this? Should I have been stronger, kinder, more patient, more careful? I sank into the chair, letting the tears come, letting them fall freely, unashamed, because what else was there to do? The room seemed to close in around me, the cheerful lights mocking me with their brightness. I thought of the people I had trusted, the promises I had believed in, and the fragile human notion that love alone could shield you from loss. It was Christmas of all days, and yet, for the first time, I felt utterly, completely alone. The world outside continued, as it always did, cars moving along icy streets, neighbors carrying packages and gifts, children laughing at the magic of snow. But I was suspended in a private hell, a grief that was mine alone, and I did not know how to navigate it. I thought of my own mistakes, of the ways I had hurt people, the times I had failed to act, the moments I had chosen pride over connection. Reflection in that moment was both cruel and necessary. I had to confront not just the external loss, but the internal failures that had led me here. And it hurt more than I had imagined possible. Yet, in the midst of this pain, a small, stubborn part of me clung to hope. Not the naive, cinematic hope that the world would simply restore itself, but the quieter, resilient hope that I could still learn, still grow, still transform the pain into something meaningful. I realized that grief, as sharp and unrelenting as it was, could teach me more about life than comfort ever could. I began to speak to myself quietly, softly, as if rehearsing a confession I had never voiced. You are allowed to feel this. You are allowed to hurt. You are allowed to fall apart. But you are not allowed to stay broken. Not forever. I wandered through the apartment, tracing the edges of memories like one traces old scars. I touched ornaments I had collected over years, each one a story, a moment frozen in time. I paused at photographs, faces smiling, unaware of the unfolding tragedy that would later reshape everything. And I thought about the impermanence of all things, the fleeting nature of joy, of love, of connection, and how, in the midst of winter, even the brightest lights would eventually dim. Christmas, I realized, was a reminder of that fragility. The holiday wasn't about perfection. It wasn't about unbroken families or flawless happiness. It was about showing up, even when everything else had fallen apart. It was about finding the courage to face the day, to acknowledge loss, and to keep moving forward with whatever grace you could muster. I remembered a lesson I had learned long ago. During a time when I had lost almost everything else, friends who turned away, opportunities that vanished, dreams that crumbled. It was that life does not ask for your consent to teach you its harshest lessons. And yet, if you can survive the storm, if you can navigate the pain, you emerge with a clarity, with a depth, with a capacity for empathy and understanding that is otherwise impossible to acquire. I sat back down by the window, letting the snow fall over the city like a gentle blanket. I thought of forgiveness, not just for those who had wronged me, but for myself. I realized that regret could be a teacher, but only if I allowed it to be, and that self-loathing was a trap that would keep me trapped in the past. I reflected on love, the kind that endures, the kind that falters, the kind that transforms. I remembered moments of tenderness, small gestures that had seemed inconsequential at the time but now shone like beacons in the darkness. I allowed myself to feel gratitude for those moments, even as I mourned the absence of what once was. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, a sense of resolve began to form. Not a grand, dramatic resolve, but a quiet, steadfast commitment to live with intention, to be present, to nurture connection wherever it remained possible. I understood that Christmas, despite everything, was still a day of beginnings. Even in the wake of loss, even when the world felt cold and unfeeling, there was still space to create warmth, to reach out, to forgive, to love. I spent hours that day reflecting, wandering, revisiting memories and lessons. The pain never fully dissipated, and I did not want it to. Pain, I realized, was a sign of having lived, of having cared, of having invested in the world and its people. To deny it would be to deny my own humanity. As night fell and the city lights twinkled against the darkness, I allowed myself a final act of quiet ritual. I lit a single candle on the windowsill, letting its flame dance in the cold winter air. I watched it, mesmerized, and I spoke to it softly, as if speaking to a part of myself that had been lost. I will not be defeated by this. I will remember, I will grieve, I will learn, and I will go on. Even when everything falls apart, I will find a way to rise. And in that moment, I felt a fragile, trembling sense of peace. Not the naive peace of denial, not the false comfort of ignorance, but the hard-won peace of acceptance. The day everything fell apart had taught me that even in the darkest winters, even when the heart feels heavy and the world unyielding, there is still room for light, for hope, for the quiet courage to continue. Christmas was never just a day. It was a reminder, a challenge, a call to confront life's fragility and still choose to embrace it fully. I would carry that lesson forward, in every cold morning, in every quiet evening, in every moment of connection or loss. I would carry it with me, and in doing so, I would honor both the joy and the sorrow that had shaped me into who I was, and who I was still becoming. Because that, I realized, is what life asks of us: to endure, to reflect, to love, and to rise again and again, even when everything falls apart.